All right, let's see. It's one of those mornings again. Grey sky, a bit chilly, the kind where you step outside and immediately wonder if you should have stayed under the duvet a bit longer. Anyway, how are you doing today?
I know exactly what you mean. This morning, I actually opened the curtains and just stood there for a second thinking, do I really need to be up right now?
That's always the dangerous moment, isn't it? The 5 seconds where you're deciding between being responsible or going straight back to sleep.
Exactly. And I'll be honest, if I didn't have things to do today, I probably would have chosen the second option.
Funny you say that, actually, because I was thinking about something quite similar the other day. You know those videos people post online? The ones where they say something like, "This is my perfect day in London," or "my ideal Sunday routine."
Oh yeah, I've seen loads of those. They always look incredibly calm and organised. Nice coffee, a lovely breakfast, maybe a walk somewhere pretty. Everything looks very, polished.
That's the word. Polished. Real life rarely feels quite that tidy though.
True. Most days are more like rushing out the door and hoping you remembered your keys.
Exactly. Which got me thinking. Let me ask you something. Imagine tomorrow you didn't have to work. No schedule, no responsibilities, nothing urgent waiting for you. What would your perfect day actually look like?
That's a good question, actually. I don't think I've ever properly planned a perfect day. I suppose I'd start by sleeping in a bit. Not ridiculously late, but just enough that you wake up naturally.
That already sounds like a strong start.
Then maybe a slow breakfast. Nothing fancy, just something nice. Maybe coffee, maybe sitting somewhere quiet. And after that, I don't know, probably go for a walk somewhere.
Interesting. You've already mentioned 2 things people here seem to love on their days off: sleeping a bit longer and going for a walk.
Actually, that's true. And now that I think about it, a perfect day probably looks quite different depending on where you live, doesn't it?
I'd say so, yeah.
Which makes me curious now. If someone asked people in Britain what their perfect day looks like, I wonder what they'd say. Oh, and before we go any further, quick note for anyone listening for the first time. This is Mind the Gap. We usually sit down and chat about everyday life in Britain, the kind of little details you might not notice at first.
Right. And today's little question seems like a good place to start. What does a genuinely good day look like here? Not the picture-perfect version online, but the kind people actually enjoy.
Yeah, because somehow I have a feeling it might be a lot simpler than those videos make it look.
I think you might be right about that. Let's see if we can piece one together.
Alright, so we've got the idea of a perfect day. No work, no rush, nothing urgent. I'm still curious though, where does that day actually begin? Because the way people start their morning usually says a lot about how the rest of the day goes.
That's a good point. And I think this is where expectations can be a bit misleading. When people imagine an ideal day, they often picture something very active. Lots of plans, lots of places to go. But if you look at how many people here actually spend a really nice morning, it's often the opposite. Things tend to start quite slowly.
Slow how exactly?
Well, imagine a typical weekend morning. The streets are still fairly quiet. The shops are only just opening. Someone's walking their dog down the pavement. Someone else is popping into a small cafe for a coffee. Nothing dramatic, really. People just take their time waking up to the day.
That actually sounds quite nice. I think a lot of people imagine mornings needing to be productive, like you should already be doing something useful.
Yes, that pressure definitely exists. But weekends tend to soften that a bit. People allow themselves to move at a gentler pace.
I have to admit something. When I imagine a British morning, I immediately picture a full English breakfast. Eggs, sausages, beans, toast, the whole thing.
A lot of people do imagine that. It's become a bit of a symbol, hasn't it? The funny thing is, most people don't actually eat that every morning. It's more of a weekend thing or something you might order when you're out somewhere.
That makes sense. I imagine eating that every day would be quite a commitment.
Exactly. It's delicious, but probably not something you want before a regular workday.
So, what does a normal slow morning look like then?
Often it's very simple. A cup of tea at home, maybe some toast. Or people might wander out to a local cafe and sit there for a bit. And one thing I've noticed is that people don't always rush those moments. They'll sit there, look out the window, watch people walking past.
People watching.
Exactly. It's surprisingly relaxing.
You know what's funny? When I try to plan a perfect day, I often end up filling it with too many things. Then halfway through the day, I'm already tired.
That happens a lot. Sometimes the best days are the ones that aren't packed with plans. If the morning starts quietly, the whole day tends to feel calmer. You're not chasing the clock.
I quite like that idea, actually. A morning that doesn't feel rushed.
Exactly. A good day doesn't always begin with excitement. Sometimes it begins with a quiet cup of tea.
All right, I'm starting to see the pattern here. Sleep a little longer, take the morning slowly, and eventually head out for a walk.
You're getting ahead of us a bit there, but yes, that's usually the next step.
You mentioned something just now that caught my attention. The idea of going out for a walk. That seems to come up quite a lot when people talk about their day off.
It does, doesn't it? It's almost a default plan. If someone has a free afternoon, sooner or later someone will say, "Shall we go for a walk?"
That phrase sounds very casual though. When I hear a walk, I imagine something short, maybe 15 minutes around the block.
That's the interesting part. A British walk can be slightly longer than that.
How much longer are we talking about here?
Well, it might start with the idea of a short walk, but it can easily turn into an hour or two, especially if you're somewhere nice, like a park or the countryside.
2 hours is not a walk. That's practically a small expedition.
It might feel that way at first, but once you're out there, it doesn't really feel like exercise. It's more like just spending time outside. Picture a path through the countryside, fields on both sides, maybe a few sheep in the distance. You walk for a bit, stop for a moment, carry on again.
That does sound quite peaceful, actually.
It is, and you'll see all sorts of people doing it. Couples, families, people with dogs, sometimes entire groups heading out together.
I'm guessing dogs are very happy about this tradition.
Oh, absolutely. For many dogs, it's the highlight of the week.
All right, but I have to ask something. What happens if the weather's terrible? Because, let's be honest, that's not exactly rare here.
That's fair. The weather isn't always cooperative, but people usually don't cancel a walk unless it's really extreme.
So, a bit of rain doesn't stop anyone?
Not really. A bit of rain, a bit of wind. People just put on a jacket and carry on. In fact, some of the nicest walks happen when the weather isn't perfect. The air feels fresh, everything smells different.
That's interesting. I think in a lot of places people wait for perfect weather before going outside.
Here it's a bit different. If we waited for perfect weather every time, we'd probably stay indoors quite a lot.
Fair point.
And there's another funny detail about these walks.
Oh?
Quite often, the walk has a destination. It might not be obvious at first, but eventually you arrive somewhere.
Let me guess. A cafe?
Sometimes, but quite often, a pub.
So the walk is actually leading to a drink?
Let's just say the pub can be a very motivating destination.
That suddenly makes the 2-hour walk make a lot more sense. All right, I have to admit, that part made me laugh a little. The idea that people go for a casual walk and somehow end up at a pub.
It happens more often than people expect. The walk is genuine, don't get me wrong, but arriving at a pub at the end is rarely an accident.
I suppose that makes sense. After a long walk, sitting down somewhere warm sounds pretty appealing.
Exactly, and that's where pubs come in. A lot of people assume pubs are mainly about drinking late at night, but during the day they feel quite different. In the afternoon, they're often much calmer. People drop in for lunch, meet a friend, or just sit for a while and talk.
So it's not really like a nightclub atmosphere or anything like that?
Not at all. Most of the time it's quite relaxed. Think wooden tables, a bit of background chatter, maybe a dog lying under someone's chair.
Dogs again. They seem to appear in every part of this perfect day.
That's true. Quite a lot of pubs welcome dogs, especially in the countryside.
I have a question though. If someone walks into a pub for the first time, do they have to order alcohol?
Not at all. That's a common misunderstanding. You can order all sorts of things. Tea, coffee, soft drinks, even just food.
So someone could just sit there with a cup of tea?
Absolutely. Nobody would find that strange.
That's interesting. I think some people imagine pubs as places where everyone already knows each other.
Sometimes that happens in very small villages, but even then newcomers are usually welcome. Most pubs are quite informal. You might see a couple of friends catching up in one corner, a family having lunch at another table, and someone else just reading quietly with a drink.
That sounds much more relaxed than people imagine.
It really is, and on a sunny day, the pub garden becomes the best seat in the house.
Oh, right. Those outdoor tables.
Exactly. People sit outside, have a drink or a meal, and talk for hours without really noticing the time passing.
That actually sounds like a very good afternoon.
It can be, especially after a long walk. You sit down, take a breath, and suddenly the whole day feels nicely balanced.
So if we look at the day we're building here, it starts slow in the morning, then there's a walk, and then a pub stop in the afternoon.
That's shaping up quite nicely, isn't it?
Although I do feel like something important is still missing.
Oh.
Food, a proper meal somewhere in the day.
Oh, yes. Now we're getting to a very important tradition.
Now that you've mentioned food, there's one thing that almost has to appear in this perfect day we're building, especially if that day happens to be a Sunday.
Let me guess, this is where the famous Sunday roast comes in.
That's the one. For quite a lot of people, Sunday roast is almost a little weekly ritual.
I've seen pictures of those before. It looks like a very serious plate of food.
It can be quite impressive, yes. Usually there's some kind of roasted meat, maybe chicken, beef or lamb. Then you'll have roast potatoes, vegetables and often Yorkshire pudding.
That already sounds like a full meal, and we're only halfway through the description.
There's usually gravy as well, poured over the top. It's one of those meals that feels quite comforting, especially on a slow Sunday afternoon.
I can imagine people sitting around the table for quite a while with a meal like that.
Exactly. It's not the sort of thing people rush through. The meal becomes a moment to sit down, chat, and take things slowly. Sometimes it's family, sometimes a group of friends. People talk about the week, tell stories, or just enjoy the atmosphere.
That actually sounds like a really nice way to spend the afternoon.
It is, especially when the weather outside's a bit chilly. Being inside somewhere warm with a good meal just feels right.
Although I do have to ask, after a meal that big, does anyone actually want to move afterwards?
Honestly, not really. Quite often, people just lean back in their chairs and take a moment. You'll hear someone say something like, "I might need a short walk after that."
Another walk?
Well, maybe a very slow one this time.
I am starting to notice a pattern here. Walk, pub, big meal, and then possibly another walk.
It does seem to revolve around food and fresh air, doesn't it?
And conversation as well. That seems to be the thread through the whole day.
That's a good observation, actually. None of these moments are rushed. The day moves along quite naturally.
So by the time the meal is finished, the afternoon is probably starting to turn into evening.
Exactly. And that's usually when the pace slows down even more.
You know, now that we've walked through the whole day, something just occurred to me. None of it sounds particularly dramatic.
That's probably true. There's no big event, no grand finale waiting at the end.
Right. We didn't climb a mountain or travel across the country. We mostly just walked, talked, and ate.
When you put it like that, it sounds quite simple.
But strangely, it still feels like a very full day.
I think that's because a lot of the enjoyment comes from the small moments, not necessarily from doing something spectacular. And by the time evening arrives, people usually don't feel the need to do much more.
So, what does the evening look like then?
Often it's very quiet. People might head back home, make a cup of tea, maybe watch a bit of television. Others might stay a little longer with friends, just talking, nothing planned, nothing rushed.
That sounds like the opposite of those perfect day videos we mentioned earlier.
Exactly. Those often end with fireworks or a sunset view somewhere dramatic. But in reality, a lot of good days simply fade into a quiet evening.
I actually like the idea. It feels peaceful somehow.
Sometimes the best part of the day is exactly that moment when everything finally slows down.
No alarms, no plans for tomorrow yet. Just the end of a good day.
That's about as perfect as it gets. So if we look back at the day we've built here, it actually started quite gently. A slow morning, maybe a coffee somewhere quiet, then a walk outside, a bit of fresh air, eventually ending up at a pub. After that, a proper meal, plenty of conversation, and eventually a calm evening.
When you say it like that, it almost sounds like nothing special happened.
And yet it still sounds like a pretty good day.
I have to admit, it does. In fact, I'm starting to feel like I'd quite enjoy a weekend exactly like that.
Well, the good news is that sort of day isn't difficult to find.
All right, before we disappear into our own imaginary Sunday afternoon, we should probably wrap things up here. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to follow the show and feel free to share it with a friend who might like listening along as well.
All right then, we'll see you next week.